And it's War Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Tuesday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about any of the true crime stories that are discussed on this episode. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. And because today is Tuesday, once again, you guys get to say hello to Snoopy here. Always nice to see Snoopy. And I also want to remind you guys that you can get this show anywhere you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, all of the major podcasting circuits under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast. True Crime Talk Radio is a segment where I discuss multiple true crime subjects within a single episode. And it's great to be back with the normal schedule. I'm going to be coming to you guys live every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have been doing some other things on the channel, such as the series about JonBenet Ramsey, and last week I had the opportunity to interview Sonnet Damont, who is the author of the upcoming book When Dangerous Feels Like Home. So I uploaded that in place of the True Crime Talk Radio episode. But it's really just good to be back in the swing of things, where on True Crime Talk Radio, you can put anything you want in the chat. You can say anything you want. I'll try my best to discuss any of the true crime cases, and sometimes you guys make really good recommendations that can be worked into future episodes of Black Box Online Radio. But first, we have some people here in the chat. We have Mike Half Moon Mullins, who says, "Howdy, Ned." Hey, howdy to you too, Mike. You were here first, so you got a cheers from Snoopy. Dr. Casbah is here. Good morning, Dr. Casbah. Classic Chevy Cat says, "Good day to all." Good day to you too, Classic Chevy Cat, and Lacey is here. Now, prime example, Lacey recommended the story of Jeffrey McDonald to me last year, and I did a couple episodes here on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning where I was discussing the case of Jeffrey McDonald and some similar stories. If you have ideas for future episodes of Black Box Online Radio, you can let me know, and perhaps they'll be worked into like these live streams here. But I also want to remind you, to anybody who's listening, that every Monday I do a segment about the Zodiac killer. And I'm going to start something that I meant to start a very long time ago. And I'm going to be giving out an award for the comment of the week. So please share what you think. And on Mondays, on Zodiac Monday, I'm going to be giving out an award every week for the best comment that I receive here on Black Box Online Radio. Scott Bobbitt is here saying, "Good morning, everyone." Good morning to you too, Scott. All right, so you can see from the title of this episode that I'm going to be talking about criminal cover-ups. But first, I'd like to begin True Crime Talk Radio with the Crime Talk points. I'm a daily listener to Crime Talk. I start the days with Crime Talk. And the most popular story that's discussed on Crime Talk is the Brian Kohberger case and the story of the Idaho 4, the quadruple homicide that occurred back in 2022. And the host of Crime Talk is an attorney, and he brought up something that I thought was a little bit interesting, but I also had to challenge. That is that with the Idaho murder, some people are trying to say that Brian Kohberger, the alleged perpetrator, was not guilty. They are proposing alternative theories. And what he said was, if you want to propose an alternate theory, you have to prove it. And I thought this was a very strange thing coming from a lawyer, because in a court of law, you don't have to prove that your client is innocent, right? You just have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to eliminate these types of certainties that people have. You also might hear the expression beyond the shadow of a doubt. Like if someone has any reason to suspect that like there's this gaping hole in the prosecution's theory, you're supposed to find the defendant not guilty. So I thought that was a very strange thing to hear from a lawyer. And on Black Box Online Radio, I don't tend to think like that. Actually, I know that most of you guys in the chat, you don't think like that either. The way you guys operate is you start thinking perhaps along the lines of, you want the truth, you want the facts, and it's not just, well, I don't really know what happened, I can't prove it, so I'm not going to say he's the killer. You guys really want to know what's going on. So you can share anything you want about the Brian Kohberger case in the chat or the comment section. And the next thing that I do on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning is the Radio Reddit segment. Something that I get from Radio Reddit. I start the days with Crime Talk and I end with Radio Reddit. It's a really nice way to unwind, except I decided to listen to the episode about doctors giving the confessions of the worst medical emergencies that they have ever seen. Wow, that was some intense stuff. One doctor told the story of a patient that was running around the streets in a psychotic episode. and this is maybe the most intense psychotic episode that I have ever heard. And the guy got hit by a car. He fell to the ground. Most of his ribs were broken, like most of the rib cage was fractured, still able to get up. Got back to his own home, and then he found a saw, started sawing off his limbs, or no, really the extremities. He cut off both of his feet with the saw and one of his hands, and he started throwing his feet over the fence, and that is how somebody called 911 or the emergency number. This may have been in a different country, actually, and that's how they were able to apprehend the guy. Psychosis is very powerful, and it really just that isn't one thing that shocked me, because I've talked to you guys about some true crime cases and suspicious incidents here on Black Box Online Radio where the leading theory is that somebody had a psychotic episode. And it just really goes to show that when people are experiencing those types of mental illnesses, the responses are extreme, they are powerful, and they do things that are just inhumane. And one of the cases that I've talked about in the past is the story of Cindy James, a woman who got divorced from her husband, who was a psychiatrist, and Cindy James was a nurse. And she died under some very suspicious circumstances for several months, for a long period of time. It seemed like she had this stalker that was just terrorizing her life, that was just doing terrible things to her. And she even woke up once and she had a nail driven through her hand, nailed to the kitchen counter. And she was being tied up and asphyxiated, but she would wake up and just not remember any of these things that happened. And her husband, her former husband, ex-husband, the psychiatrist, stated that he thought that she was actually dealing with a type of dissociative identity disorder. And I didn't want to hear that at all, because I was just thinking, goodness, how suspicious is this? Psychiatrist, ex-husband, his ex-wife being abused, so he comes up with some type of multiple personality theory. You cannot fault me for being suspicious, but that is one where over time I actually begin to think that there might have been some truth to that. And you could, after hearing that story of the person who sawed off not only his hand, but both of his feet and threw them over a fence, then the concept of poking a nail through someone's palm during a psychotic episode and hitting it with a mallet doesn't seem completely out of reach. But if you'd like to hear more about the case of Cindy James, perhaps we can discuss it more in a future episode of Black Box Online Radio. I've also been watching a lot of 48 Hours recently, and I saw an episode called The Ivy League Murder, which came out. And this is going to get into the territory of today's title feature: bizarre cover-ups, strange cover-ups that were committed by criminals. And it told the story of the murder of Kevin Jiang, a student at Yale University who was murdered by another student from MIT. Kevin Jiang had just proposed to his girlfriend Zion, and then, out of nowhere, he was shot by somebody just wielding a handgun. Someone pulled their car over and shot him, and it looked like a road rage incident. And also in the town where he lived, there were just these other reports of people just hearing gunshots at very odd places. And somebody, a grad student at MIT who was specializing in artificial intelligence, was the perpetrator. And they believe that he developed some type of bizarre obsession with Kevin's fiance, and that only because he followed her on Facebook, but not Kevin. That was really the only link between these two individuals. Is that they seem to have the connection through the fiance. And he decided to rent cars out, or not even rent, he's taking test drives from vehicles, driving around, test driving a car just to see how it goes. And then he was able to pull it over, walk away, fire some gunshots, and then go back to the car that he was test driving, trying to plant all of these false leads, all of these bizarre clues. And this is one of the weird examples of somebody who's actually trying to spread this web of lies around a bunch of true crime incidents, committing a series of unrelated shootings to cover up the specific target. He only had one target, but he's walking around just firing the gun, trying to confuse the authorities. And maybe he would have gotten away with it, except his car went off the road during a snowstorm, and he relied on the assistance of the authorities. They told him he needed a tow truck and he had to stay in a hotel. Then the next day, somebody saw the car, and they actually called it in because he had an open box of ammunition and a firearm in the car that was visible. And they had the description of the car, so they traced it back to the guy. And these criminals always leave something behind. Jeff Jones is here. Good to see you, Ned. Hey, good to see you too, Jeff. You got a cheers from Snoopy. Welcome to the return of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. So this guy goes on the run for a very long time, up and down the East Coast, all around the eastern seaboard, trying to evade the authorities. Ultimately, he was captured. And that is called the Ivy League murder, available on 48 hours. And it goes to show that this is someone who has an extremely high IQ. We're talking about MIT robotics kind of IQ. And he put an enormous amount of planning into the crime, which again, they think it was because of sexual frustration, inability to form social relationships, jealousy, and all of those things were just driving him to a breaking point where he just decided that he wanted to retaliate in a destructive way. You could say all of those things about Brian Kohberger. Am I talking about this MIT grad student, or am I talking about the Washington State grad student who allegedly committed the quadruple homicide? Now, another channel that I visit from time to time is True Crime News. And True Crime News actually uploads content from other channels too, because I just happened to catch an episode of Crime Watch Daily. And she was someone who was found buried in the ground. But prior to her burial, someone had murdered her. Then they had taken up pairs of hardware store tools, cut off her fingernails, pulled them off with pliers, and then her fingerprints were cut off, and her body was placed in a tub. The tub was filled with acid, and then the tools were thrown into a body of water nearby, and she was buried in the ground. Oddly, the killer marked the burial site with a red flag. And we have a couple of people here in the chat. Cowpoke is here. Good morning. Good morning to you too, Cowpoke. Don Spain is here saying good morning, Ned in chat. Good morning to you too, Don Spain. How's everybody doing? Welcome to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And after this event happened, that there's just this very, very bizarre disappearance, and the murder is not only extremely horrific, the murder was involving a very, very intense cover-up by the killer. This person went to an extremely strong level to hide the identity of the victim. Did they catch the killer? Yes. How did they catch the murderer of Trisha Todd? Ex-husband. Ex-husband. That's why I was so suspicious in the Cindy James case. It was the ex-husband. And of course, they're putting the focus on him. They're investigating him. They're looking for little slip-ups that he's going to make along the way. And ultimately, he was cornered by the authorities, made a full confession. He showed them where the body was buried, showed them how he marked it with a red flag, which really goes to show that this is a type of power tripping. I talk about this all the time on Black Box Online Radio when a killer might want to commit a murder for power. And when they want to bury the body, they want to know where the remains are. They don't necessarily want to be caught, but they take satisfaction in being the one who gets to know what's going on. They know the truth and nobody else does. So if anybody would like to challenge me on that, please put your ideas in the comment section down below and the live chat here. Now, Kid Freshie says, what elements make a good comment? Oh, you're talking about for the new award for the comment of the week? Well, Kid Freshie, that's a pretty good question. Overall, it's just anything that happens to catch my eye. Okay, but Kid Freshie asked me something, and I really like to give very specific responses when someone asks me a direct question. Kid Freshie, a good comment is one that is insightful. When somebody is showing me something about some of the cases that I talk about here on Black Box Online Radio, mostly the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and D.B. Cooper, then if you make a very insightful observation, it can be worked into the show for Zodiac Monday, and you might get the award for the comment of the week. How is everything that I'm telling you relevant to the Zodiac Killer mystery? How is the murder of Trisha Todd relevant to the Zodiac Killer mystery? I'm not convinced that the Zodiac Killer, or Jack the Ripper even, had any personal connections among the victims. Like, from the killer to the victims, I'm not convinced that the killer knew any of these people or that there were any specific targets. With the murder of Trisha Todd, there was a specific target. It was the ex-husband. Even with the murder of Kevin Jung, he was a specific target. It was a jealousy angle. So when someone is the specific target, that creates a much larger line of evidence, like a paper trail going back to the victim, or it's like the trail of breadcrumbs going back to the killer, from the victim to the killer. And Mr. Flag Nasty is here saying, "Let's go, Ned, baby, we love you." Hey, Mr. Flag Nasty, you got a cheers from Snoopy. Welcome to the return of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And to everybody who's listening here, especially if you follow the Jack the Ripper episodes, but if you follow the Zodiac Killer episodes, either case, do you believe that there were connections among the killer and the victims? Do you believe the killer knew the victims personally? Of course, you can weigh in the D.B. Cooper case. Some people think that Tina Mucklow knew D.B. Cooper. Other people think that D.B. Cooper just happened to board a plane with a briefcase and a bag in 1971, and then he jumped out into the sky, never to be seen or heard from again. But I would really like to know what all you guys think. And I think it just goes to show that there's less evidence when the killer didn't know the victims. And I think that this is something that the Zodiac killer really used to his advantage. It's something that is one of the reasons why the Zodiac killer was not caught. Because another big difference is, with both the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper, we didn't live in the world of electronic communication. Oh, Mr. Flag Nasty says way less evidence. Exactly. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have email. We didn't have floppy disks. Hello, Dennis Rader. And also, even Maury Travis, the St. Louis basement killer, he got caught because he wrote a taunting letter that involved a map that had a URL written on it, and there was information that they could extract and trace it back to him. That's how that serial killer got caught. So when we live in a world of electronic communication, there's just more evidence that's left behind. And with the murder of Kevin Jung, I told you that his killer was following his girlfriend and ultimately fiance on Facebook. So that's just another pathway that links these people together. The Zodiac had none of that. Nope. The Zodiac is writing in letters, and it's quite possible that the Zodiac may have been wearing gloves when he was writing the letters. It's quite possible that the Zodiac may not have been touching the paper intensely. And as Mike Rodelli talks about in The Shadow of Mount Diablo, maybe the Zodiac even used a sponge and water to seal his envelopes and did not even have to lick the stamps or the envelopes, so there's no saliva DNA. Classic Chevy Cat says, "Honestly, I feel the victims were random, although Tom seems to think that Cecilia and Sherry were connected. Sorry for misspelling." No, actually, I think you got Cecilia and Sherry's name right. Both of those names were spelled correctly. Now, that's the Riverside connection. Okay, Cecilia's murdered in Northern California. Sherry's murdered in Southern California. I've talked about that a lot. I said for a very long time, I thought that Cecilia Shepard, Cecilia would be the fourth victim of the Zodiac killer. I've said for a long time that I thought that was my go-to theory, that she was murdered by the Zodiac as a specific target. And I totally had to admit, I have no evidence of that. But it is true. I mean, we have to give Tom credit for that. There is the Riverside connection between Cecilia and Sherry Jo Bates. At the very least, it's the same town, same part of the state, but definitely, I mean, it's the same municipal area. There could be something there, and I do give you something for that. Andrew WVA says, "I'm not convinced those two were connected. Kind of like 6 degrees of separation." Okay, Andrew, you're saying you're not convinced that those two were connected. Which two do you mean? Do you mean any of the two Zodiac victims? Mr. Flack Nasty says, "If the Zodiac killer knew any of them, he would have been caught personally, I believe." All right. So that's what I'm doing with all this whole episode so far on the bizarre killer cover-ups. I'm like, when these people had personal connections with the victims and they're trying to murder a specific person because of a personal issue, they got caught. And when you look at the activities of the Zodiac, by targeting victims at random, it would just create such a small possibility of him getting caught. For example, you guys all know this, that Darlene Ferrin, the victim of the Zodiac killer who was killed on July 4th of 69, was married. She had been married twice, to Jim Phillips Crabtree and to Dean Ferrin. So the suspicion goes on both Ferrin's first husband, Jim Crabtree, and her second husband, Dean Ferrin, which, as I understand, Dean Ferrin had an airtight alibi. There's no possible way he could have done it. He was at work, witnessed by numerous people. I don't think he did it, but that's suspecting the ex-husband. And to all of you out there who regularly watch true crime programs, I've already talked to you about 48 Hours True Crime News, Crime Watch Daily, your favorite ones. Maybe even throw in Forensic Files or something. Maybe you like to watch Dateline. There are just so many stories about how a husband murders his wife or ex-wife and does something really weird to cover it up. Maybe they'll start throwing blood in weird places. Maybe they'll start turning a table over. And they're just, I can't even remember the name of the true crime show that I was watching, but it was like they said somebody ransacked the house, but they tried to make it look like a burglar had done it. But it was a very piss poor job. They just pulled out like one drawer and they turned the table over gently. Just a very nonsensical way to make the house look like it was burglarized. But that's what happens on those shows. That's why these shows exist, like 48 Hours and Dateline, because they're telling the stories of people who want to murder somebody for a very specific reason, and they go to very great lengths to cover it up. And now, Andrew says the people that he was talking about were Cecilia and Sherry, that they knew each other. I mean, there could be the Riverside connection. I'm just not convinced of it because I think that it's something that the British journalist David Aronovich would say is marvelly interesting to explore. Now, it doesn't hurt to keep looking into that. I can't guarantee what you will find, but it doesn't hurt to keep exploring. Charlie Don't Surf is here saying, hi. Hey, Charlie, how's it going? You got a cheers from Snoopy. Grunge Truck says, I think it's possible that the Zodiac visited the restaurant where one of the victims worked, and I think he took credit for some of the crimes to throw the police off. Yes, that's what I think so too. I don't know about the restaurant thing, Grunge Truck, but I'll respond to the second part of your comment first. What I think the Zodiac did was just that. After the murder of Paul Stein, he already has the attention of the San Francisco Bay. He has the attention of the authorities and the newspapers and the detectives. So he's going to start jerking them around, taking credit for crimes that he didn't commit. Most notably, the Kathleen Johns incident. Also, Riverside activity, possibly claiming the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. It just says Riverside activity. In the past, I completely dismissed the connections between the Zodiac killer and Donna Lass, who was abducted on September 6th of 1970. Now, I entertain that possibility much more. I think that I still feel about the same as so there's a 70% chance, but I think that there's a lot of reasons to suspect the Zodiac in the murder of Donna Lass. Because how about the cards? I mean, how about the Halloween card could be referring to Donna Lass, and also the Peek Through the Pines card is definitely referring to the Lake Tahoe region where Donna Lass was murdered. So I've had not a complete reversal on that one. It's just I entertain the possibility much more. Mr. Black Nasty says, she mentioned Richard. I think Mike Mageau knew a lot more than he said or told the police, and still knows something. Well, Mr. Black Nasty, maybe it was Richard Hoffman, and Jay Foy was right about everything. The guy who accused his grandfather, Richard Hoffman, of being the Zodiac killer, and we're just going to be seeing more and more suspects named Richard. More and more suspects are popping up. I already talked to you about Richard Parker and how the Zodiac could be advised by Richard Manley. And Scott Bobbitt says, I think some of the victims were acquaintances. Sure, I'd love to hear more about that, Scott. DB is here. Are you DB Cooper or the other one? Because there's at least more than one DB out there. If Cecilia knew the killer, I bet that's why he wore a hood. He was chickenish. Yes, I said that stuff on the Zodiac Killer channel years ago. I was just like, that's why I think he wore the hood. He used a knife because that one was personal. He knew the victim. He didn't want to be recognized, so she wouldn't start making comments about him, trying to talk him out of it. He's talking in a distorted voice. And that's another thing, by the way. Thanks, Snoop. All of these things about the Zodiac Killer talking in a monotone or this unusual voice that he has. Can I just share what I genuinely think the Zodiac Killer is doing? And this is not rocket science. It's not even psychiatry. He's disguising his voice. If you go 1 mile east on the Columbus Parkway, you'll find 2 kids in a brown car. He's trying to talk in a different way so people won't recognize him. He's playing a character. He's trying to be different, act out a fantasy, but also he's disguising his voice, especially when he's talking to Cecilia and Brian, because maybe Cecilia did know him, but even if she didn't, I mean, like, are you just going to talk in your natural voice when you're hiding behind the hooded costume, even if you're expecting the victims to die? Mike Mageau survives, so the Zodiac could be very well aware that the victims could survive and tell the story. But also, I just think that that kind of goes with the territory. He's trying to be somebody else, playing a different part. The Zodiac is almost just like a different persona compared to whatever his real name was. Yes. But we have Classic Chevy Cat saying, rumor has it that Cecilia and Sherry knew each other, right? Rumor or fact? Now, can somebody let me know? I think that it's a rumor. I mean, they both had connections to Riverside. They're both, lived in Riverside at times because Cecilia did college work down there. Sherry is, of course, from Riverside, murdered in Riverside. I don't know how closely they were related. It's just been a possibility that was highly entertained. And yes, I heard the episode of Murder Basement that talked about that. Mr. Flack Nasty says, plus he shot a man with a 38, and he didn't say it was a cop. If he killed a cop, why wouldn't he take credit for that? Exactly. He says there's more glory in shooting a cop than shooting a kid, but Officer Richard Redditich is thought to be a Zodiac victim. I don't think he was murdered by the Zodiac, actually. I think that the Zodiac stopped killing after Paul Stein. I just think there's insufficient evidence of anything. I entertained Donna last, but with all these other things, I just think that it's almost too much conjecture at a certain point. Now, DB says something to the effect of, maybe he followed her there. Okay, this is not the real DB Cooper. This is the other one. All right. Well, DB, if you ever do meet the real DB Cooper, please put him in touch with me. I want that exclusive interview. I know Ryan Burns deserves it on the DB Cooper Sleuth channel. No, I want it here on Black Box Online Radio. DB Cooper face reveal. How cool would that be? Andrew WVA says, digressing a little, but I found a page from the October 23rd, 1969 Stanford Chaparral. Looks like both articles could have been written by Richard Gaikowski. And yes, a lot of that stuff comes up in the book. The Only Time Richard Got Angry at Me by James Big Twin, looking at Gaikowski as a suspect. And it just goes to show that Gaikowski worked in the newspaper business, and it's possible that he was writing articles for Stanford and doing a bunch of weird things. I still have my copy of The Good Times that I have to go through again because I want to look at some more clues that could be written. And yes, it does have a Geik article. Mr. Flack Nasty says, so many Richards. Maybe Richard Nixon. Why not at this point? Richard Nixon may have masterminded D.B. Cooper by using his emissary, E. Howard Hunt. The Zodiac Killer, I'm not sure of. I've talked about that a lot, actually. This whole thing's about, using the CIA to change modern culture and so on, creating the image of terror in the San Francisco Bay Area to shut down those damn hippies. There are easier ways to shut down those damn hippies than creating the Zodiac Killer and putting the ciphers into the paper. But maybe. Okay, Classic Chevy Cat says spot on about the voice. Yes, I think he's disguising the voice. Thanks, Chevy Cat. Anam Kara is here saying, hi, Ned. Hello, Anam Kara. You got a cheers from Snoopy. Mr. Flack Nasty says, yes, I think that added to his excitement, disguising his voice. Sure. He gets to pretend to be this type of dark, mysterious serial killer that's on par with a comic book villain when he's wearing that Lake Berryessa hood, even though he only wore it for 15 minutes or something, but 15 minutes he'll never forget. Yokoso is here saying, well, maybe that explains the hood, but does not explain the symbol. Yokoso, I just have to keep coming back to the symbol thing about maybe that was just something that was done for personal meaning. It could be that he took the symbol from the movie Shock Corridor from 1963, which I definitely think the Zodiac watched, where it talks about wearing a circle with a cross to make yourself invisible to the enemies. Personal significance, but that's just what Drew Beeson, author of Sighting In on the Zodiac Killer, likes to say. And that's, it had meaning to him. That's something that had meaning to him. That has nothing to do with personal connections among the victims. And as I said, I think there's insufficient evidence that the Zodiac knew Cecilia Shepard. It's something that we will be curious about. And that's what I really have to just share with you guys. And there's a difference between being curious about something. There's a difference between entertaining a possibility or, well, I mean, I think that this could be what happened, and actually saying, I know that this is what happened, or this is the most likely thing that happened. Very different stuff. Kid Freshie says, so the Zodiac killer followed her and Brian around all day and took garage sales and was prepared to go to San Francisco and then let them get out of sight for hours and then found them on the island. Kid Freshie, that could be possible. I know that a lot of people would not want to hear something like that because they're just going to be like, it's too much of a wild story. I mean, we have people stalking victims for X amount of hours prior to murdering them. We have people who are stalking victims in very covert ways, and we don't know about it until the killer is actually identified. Eric L. is here saying, LOL, piss poor. Haven't heard that for a while. Always thought it was funny. Eric L., I first heard that in the movie Armageddon when Bruce Willis likes to say that, he says the term piss poor quite frequently, and they say it at the beginning of the movie. And although I don't remember Armageddon too well, so I can't quote the film other than that. Mr. Flack Nasty says he stopped killing after the Stein murder. Agreed. I mean, it's just a possibility, but I think that's what happened. Oh, Mr. DB, yes. Hey, DB, saying it's listed as a fact on IMDb that Cecilia and Sherry Joe knew each other? All right, then. Internet Movie Database. DB says Nixon, he's not a crook. Whatever he is, he's dead now, except unless Futurama turns out to be right, and that we can just resurrect people, put their heads into jars, and then Nixon will take back the White House. Anam Kara says, I love the Howard Hunt theory. I like it more and more, and you guys know every Friday I do a segment about D.B. Cooper called Cooper Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, and I've had more and more requests to talk about E. Howard Hunt. I've done my episode on E. Howard Hunt. Perhaps I can do a book discussion on D.B. Cooper, examined, exposed, and identified by Nat LeFouc, and that could be something to explore because people want to hear more about E. Howard Hunt. They want to know, like, was this guy actually D.B. Cooper? To those of you who follow that mystery, Skip Hall is a very promising suspect. I finally did my episode about him last Friday. Ted Braden, of course, will always be in the mix until the D.B. Cooper case is solved. Wolfgang Gossett is another very interesting suspect. Interesting, he doesn't necessarily mean that he was D.B. Cooper. I mean, there's some questionable things about Wolfgang Gossett, but those definitely are people that are worthy of consideration. And DB says, you know who gets a pass in America? Celebrities. Oh, yes. Yes. It's quite shocking. I also have developed a very bad habit lately, and that is watching the demise of other YouTubers on YouTube. I've been watching a lot of the internet anarchist videos. He's talking about YouTubers that I've never heard of, but talking about how they ruin their careers, and I can't stop watching that stuff. I really don't know what to say. Like, I don't even know who these people are. And one of them was named Vitaly, and he beat the crap out of a woman while he was high on shrooms. No jail time. I guess he had money and a way to get out of it. And you can't even really call these people celebrities because they're so focused in certain areas. Like, there's a show out there called Drama Alert that talks about famous YouTubers, and I couldn't watch it because I don't know who any of the people are. And I began to, I can watch the internet anarchist stuff because it's talking about how they ruin their careers, and it tells the whole story. But I'm just like, I haven't seen a single video from these famous YouTubers, yet they have millions of views, millions of followers, and it's really quite odd how all of this stuff comes together. Hey, Captain Jenks is here. Hey, Captain, how's it going? Dark Side of the Moon is here saying, hello, everyone. And Andrew WVA says, the trip to Lake Berryessa was like a spur-of-the-moment decision. It seems highly unlikely that the Zodiac would have known about it in advance. No, he wouldn't have known about it in advance, but much as we said, he could be stalking someone, or he would have to be paying very close attention and following them from a distance and doing a lot of things to not go unnoticed. But by the way, I want to know what you guys think. I brought this up on a recent episode of Zodiac Monday when I was talking about how I thought the similarities between the Brian Kohberger case and the Sherry Joe Bates murder were very apparent to me. And this is all theoretical. This is a hypothesis, and I'm always trying to differentiate that between a fact and a hypothesis, that the killer of Sherry Joe Bates was someone who is he was someone who was stalking Sherry Joe for a long time. I think he had his eye on her. He had an obsession with her. I think that she was a specific target. I think everything about the Bates murder was planned. It's planned, but it's not exactly planned like the way the Zodiac would plan a crime. Instead, I think that he had some type of sexual obsession with Sherry Joe. He's watching her movements. He knew that she was going to be at the library because he's following her, and he just waited for the opportune time to stab her. I think the killer wrote the confession, but I don't think he wrote any of the other communications. What do you think about that? Where am I wrong? Challenge me. This is a live chat. You can put anything you want in the comments section. Kid Freshie says Vitali was just arrested in Singapore and will spend decades in prison. Actually, the Philippines. He's in a Filipino jail, and one of the crimes that he was accused in the Philippines, I'm also in the Philippines, West Virginia at heart and around the globe, is causing vexation. Cannot cause vexation in the Philippines. Kid Freshie says the knife, the hood, the rope were all prepared for very specific situations that happened on a remote lake island. If he was stalking Cecilia, he would have to have been prepared to do that in San Francisco. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, see Kid Freshie. Who's to say that he wouldn't have done something like that? Vulnerable place. Serial killers and even murderers like Brian Kohberger allegedly carry kill kits. That's one of the things I even think about Brian Kohberger is that he actually made a kill kit using the K-bar knife and a hood and his fiberless overalls that he may have been wearing and the black mask, and he would have had a bunch of things that he put together. They think that he was a kill kit killer. All alleged. Ted Bundy would be a kill kit killer. Some serial killers assemble all of the things that they believe that they're going to need for committing murder, and they keep them just in the trunk of the car in an easy-to-reach place. They make a kill kit. Yeah, the Zodiac could have done that, even including the Lake Berryessa hood. Thanks, Snoop. But as far as what the Zodiac actually did, a lot of people do not think that Cecilia was a specific target for what Kid Freshie is saying. Let's play the other side of the coin for a second. Kid Freshie is onto something. When it's like they were perhaps two people who were just sitting by the lake, no one else is around. The Zodiac was stalking the lake area, not Cecilia. He just wanted to go after somebody at the lake. Why did he want to wear the hood? It was the daylight. He could have been witnessed by somebody on a boat if they passed by. And also gets to enact this comic book fantasy. The Manson family had just committed murders by knife. He wanted to outdo them, do something even more outrageous. The Manson family wrote messages on the wall, political piggy, and the Zodiac's like, I can write something more badass on a wall. Well, no, I can't because I'm at a park. There are no walls around here. I'm going to write a message on the car door. And we have one from Anam Kara who says, Vitali's money stream comes from Pornhub, Ned. All right. I know nothing about the guy. I saw one YouTube video on him. I guess he'll have to experience Filipino jail and see how it is. He can let me know. Mr. Flack Nasty says, agreed. The Sherry Joe murder was personal. It does seem like that someone really wanted to get up close and personal with Sherry Joe. And you can see how personal that crime is. How up close the Bates murder is. Whereas with the murder of Cecilia Shepard, barely personal at all. Sadistic, yes. Driving the fear into the heart of the victims, double yes. But personal, a little bit. He chose to commit the crime by knife. He definitely got more physical with Cecilia than any of the other female victims. Could be. Andrew WVA says, Sherry Joe attack seems a lot more personal than Zodiac's murders. I agree. Anam Kara says, I'm seriously thinking about the Philippines next. Currently watching from Albania. Hey, amazing. Anam Kara, are you Albanian? Somebody brought this to my attention because they know that I like to move around the globe. West Virginia at heart and from around the globe, right? And in Albania, Americans can stay for 1 year without any visa extensions or anything like that. When I hear something like that, I get curious, no matter where it is. Southern Europe, North Pole, Chile. It's really anything and everything. It gets me curious. So I'd like to know. Classic Civi Cat says it might be personal only because she was a woman. Oh, you mean the attack on Sherry Joe? You mean like I said the Zodiac. The murderer of Sherry Joe Bates had some type of animosity that was directed toward her because she was a woman, and that's it. It's not a personal connection. Just hey, here's a woman in a vulnerable place. Oh, Anam Kara, you're from Philadelphia, Irish girl from Philadelphia. Well, hey, it's great to see the world, you know. And yes, I've only been to Philadelphia one time, actually. Totally worth it, though. 15.8 says, unless the Zodiac knew Farron. Some people think the Zodiac knew all the victims. Like then, just that's why they were targeted. He knew all the victims and the women. But as I said at the beginning, when I'm talking about these other cases like the murder of Kevin Jong and the murder of Trisha Todd, when there is a personal connection between the killer and a victim, more evidence starts to arise. Look at how they investigated the Farron murder. They tracked down people that knew her, maybe someone who was bothering her, such as George Waters, the man who was named as the guy who was harassing her in the restaurant. And in the past, I've called him a Filipino. We have to love the Philippines. But it appears that he may have been a Caucasian who was born in the Philippines. Not even really sure, but his place of birth is listed as the Philippines. So, that just means that the police looked into the personal connections and the leads and someone who might have some type of personal issue. The things that they could not stop would be if somebody didn't know the women on a first name basis. Like, he knows who she is. She might not know him at all. Look at the Riverside Confession from November of 1966. I wanted to make her pay for all the brush-offs she had given me. Meaning, he's paying attention to her. She's not paying attention to him. And it's just like that. He might have had some type of desire to be with her, and she might not even have known who he was. Especially when you look at how Sherry Joe, student. Betty Lou Jensen, student. Darlene Farron, server. Cecilia Shepard, student. So many places where they could have interacted with other people. And some man could have developed an obsession with her. And back to the Brian Kohberger case, because this is the story that everyone wants to talk about. And as I told you, I'm a little bit frustrated with the news coverage, but I can't stop watching it. And this is going to just show that he may have known one of the victims, but she might not have known him well at all. He may have gone to a restaurant called the Mad Greek in Idaho, and one of the servers there was named Maddie Mogan. Another was Zena Kernodle, another victim. But he develops this obsession with Maddie, begins following her on social media. He saw that she was with her roommate, Kaylee Gonzalez, at a place called Grub Truck, the Grub Truck live stream, which is a food truck that had a video camera that's live streaming on Facebook. And then he knew that they were intoxicated in a vulnerable place, so that's when he chose to act. He had the kill kit. He was just waiting for the right time to attack the victim. He attacks two victims at once, and he chose Kaylee Gonzalez because she looked like a girl that he had an obsession with in the past. He chose Maddie Mogan because he developed a type of obsession with her at the restaurant that he frequented. Allegedly, there's some guesswork there. Some people think that's what happened. And we have Kid Freshy said, what does the mismatched tire tracks at Lake Berryessa mean to you? Well, in the past, this has been brought to my attention that the mismatched tire tracks at Lake Berryessa means that the Zodiac didn't actually park behind Brian Hartnell's car. That was something that was brought to my attention very early on in this mystery, meaning that those were old tire tracks and that the Zodiac may have had a car in a different place, or he may have just been approaching the area in a completely different way. But I'm pretty sure the Zodiac could drive. Mr. Flack Nasty says, Land did kind of look like the sketch, and Brian said he thought the killer returned. Sure, I've talked about Dennis Land a lot as a suspect in the past. And because this is True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, and I can talk to you guys about all kinds of true crime subjects here on Black Box Online Radio, I have another one that I would like to discuss with you. I've been watching the show Banfield lately, hosted by Ashley Banfield, mostly because she of course, did some Brian Kohberger coverage, but she released a DB Cooper video, a couple of DB Cooper videos recently, and earlier this year, very early on, she did a Jack the Ripper special where I believe she interviewed Russell Edwards, or that may have been on a different show. So she comes up in my suggested videos feed a lot, and I saw there was an update from the Slender Man attempted murder case, where about 10, 11 years ago, two girls launched this plan to murder one of their classmates as an offering to Slender Man because they wanted to have a paranormal experience where they could go out of this dimension and into Slender Man's world, specifically to enter his mansion. And they're talking about how one of the girls did 4 years in prison. Not prison. No, it's not prison. It's a type of psychiatric incarceration. I'll say that, an institution. She was institutionalized for 4 years and released. Then, another girl is about to be released now. The ringleader, the person who orchestrated this, who did the stabbings, she was supposed to do 40 years in a psychiatric institution. Instead, they're questioning releasing her now. And part of me felt, no, absolutely not. She should not be released if she's going to try and offer another classmate to some type of borderline cartoon character, a creepypasta character named Slender Man. You should not be getting 10 years for that. For attempted murder, I don't care if you're 12 years old, you should be serving more time than that. But some of the reasons why they were questioning her release on Banfield were that, number one, she met with someone who sold murder memorabilia at her mental hospital. I mean, she is incarcerated, and she met with somebody who sells those things. Number two, she was reported to have been reading a book called Rent Boy, which I know nothing about except what I heard on the show, and it's a book that discusses human organ trafficking, like the human organ trade. So, it seems like she is still dealing with some stereotypes of twisted and morbid thinking. And this is one of the points where my emotions and what I think about the law have to be separated. Because just because someone is reading a novel or even a nonfiction book about something as terrible as human organ trafficking doesn't mean that they're going to do it themselves. Just because someone is exploring a particular subject, it doesn't mean that they are going to do anything with it other than reading a book. I mean, you want to see how many serial killer books I got floating around over here? Also, other terrible things like the JonBenet Ramsey story. I mean, countless ones. Even some Zodiac stuff I'm looking at right now. I've never killed anyone, and I don't think I'm ever going to. So that's one thing that I have to be on her side for. The second point is meeting with somebody who sold murder memorabilia. They even brought this up because it's a discussion show, and they're like, whoa, no, wait a second. Just because you hear something like that, how do you know what the story is? Did she want him to be there? Did he approach her and try to do something business related? Did he have any previous connections to her? Was she warm and receptive to this murder memorabilia dealer? Just hearing stuff like that, I would not necessarily be on her side, but I don't think those are some strong points at all about how someone is dangerous. Reading a book and talking to someone who does some unsavory things, not enough information. Should she be released? No. Again, 10 years for trying to kill someone in the name of Slender Man, to go into his house in another dimension that almost certainly doesn't exist. Simulation theory pending. Lock her up and don't let her out for a very long time. All right, now let's get back to some of you guys here in the chat. And 158 says, "Hi, Ned. I enjoy your videos a lot, and I believe I've heard you say you think that Jack the Ripper grabbed the victims, a disorganized, insane mental patient. However, Jack the Ripper talked to Kelly and Chapman into secluded areas." Well, most people believe that Jack the Ripper entered Mary Kelly's room. And yes, I am fully able to admit that that is a problem with some of my observations. When lately I was trying to think that Jack the Ripper was not a ruse killer at all, that he didn't lure the victims to any place. He's just kind of waiting for them in the shadows, for the woman to walk by without anyone around to attack her. But yes, Jack the Ripper did most likely walk with Mary Kelly, probably Annie Chapman too, because it's reported that she at least was heard saying one or two words to the Ripper, and before she was pushed against a fence. But most people who kind of think that the Ripper was not interacting with the victims at all do not think that Mary Kelly was involved. I shouldn't say most people. I shouldn't say most people. That theory has been presented that Mary Kelly was not a victim of Jack the Ripper, that was a copycat. No, I don't buy into that. I mean, it's possible the Ripper could have changed his MO a little bit. Or, maybe it really is something to the contrary. Good point, 15-8. And it says, I also think he manipulated Nichols and Eddowes into seclusion off the main roads. Thoughts? Well, that's definitely very similar to the book that I'm reading now, I, Ripper by Stephen Hunter. All of that stuff is laid out. All of it, that he's talking to the women, he's trying to ask them about the sale of sexual services, and that's how he lures them. Now, somebody who is just dealing with some type of extreme mental illness probably would go a little bit down if that's the way you think it happened, because this seems like somebody who is emotionally in control. Now, people who have mental illnesses aren't always in psychotic episodes. Aaron Kosminski was a schizophrenic. Jacob Levy had neurosyphilis. And I think that it becomes less likely that a suspect like that would be the perpetrator if he is just dealing with it means that the motivation is not a psychotic episode. The motivation is calculated. Maybe he wanted revenge on an escort for giving him an STD. Then it's something like that. But then I would strongly look at other suspects if that's how you think the Ripper operated, that he's having conversations with them, luring them to vulnerable places and attacking them. That sounds way more calculated than someone who is just out of control. Kid Freshie says, do you agree with the investigators that the mismatched tire remains mean that the Zodiac killer didn't have the money to maintain his car properly? Sounds like you don't think the mismatched tire tracks aren't his car. Oh, I don't know. I don't actually know if they're his car or not. Kid Freshie, I do not like it when people immediately jump to conclusions like that, saying, mismatched tire tracks. Therefore, he's driving a car. He doesn't maintain it properly. He's poor. Not necessarily. He could have a working job and just didn't care about his tires. Didn't care about stuff like that. So, I mean, that's jumping to conclusions if you think that he's poor only because of that. And Kid Freshie says, murder and even death is a very abstract concept, especially to kids. I don't fault any child for that. How exactly do you mean, Kid Freshie? And we have Anam Kara, who says, I'm convinced it was Charles Lechmere, Ned. Oh, yes, I was actually just talking about that on one of the Jack the Ripper shorts that came out recently. Charles Lechmere still is a strong suspect for me. He definitely would have had all of the opportunities to do that. And he would fall into the category, I think, of someone who would be attacking women for a calculated reason, not simply just because he's losing control of his mental faculties. It seems like everything in that theory is that it was designed. Now, 15-8 has brought it to my attention that I've been saying in the past, though, over the past several Ripper Wednesdays, that I've been thinking that the Ripper was somebody who was not exactly calculating, just he's going out with the intention to kill, but doesn't care who the victims are. He just wants to get a woman in a vulnerable place. He's just hiding in the shadows and waiting for her to walk by. But Kim, 15-8, you brought up some very good challenges to those types of observations that I've been making. And, I'm going to rethink some of these things, and I'll discuss more tomorrow. And yes, I'll be doing an episode on the murder of Mary Kelly tomorrow for Ripper Wednesday. I'm going to do some new analysis on that. Adam Carr says, timing and finding Polly in Bucks Row. Okay, Adam Carr, it's really interesting you say that about Charles Lechmere, because Steve Blomer appeared on the Jack the Ripper Tour YouTube channel for an interview. His top suspect is Aaron Kosminski, or some variant of that. He actually says Anderson's suspect, meaning Kosminski. And he says, okay, everybody's zoning in on Charles Lechmere as being Jack the Ripper. He claims he left home at 3:15 a.m. on the night of the morning of the Nichols murder. And he didn't meet up with Robert Paul until 3:35 a.m., or Robert Paul doesn't get there until 3:35 a.m. Yet it only takes 10 minutes to walk from Lechmere's home to Bucks Row. There are 8 to 10 minutes that are not accounted for. And Steve Blomer's openly like, yeah, okay, he's not my suspect, but I've actually done that walk myself, and I did it in 7 minutes. Even more time. So in that 8 to 13 minutes, he could have committed the Nichols murder. Here's somebody coming, puts on his overcoat, his gloves. What in the world could that be? That timing is shocking. But there are some possibilities and challenges. Number one, Lechmere was walking slower than he expected. Number two, Lechmere left home much later than he expected. That could solve everything. If he left home 7 or 8 minutes later, that whole time discrepancy might start falling apart. And 15.8 says correct. Plus, in my humble opinion, Jack the Ripper was organized and very crafty and a convincing person. All right, I'm going to rethink some of these things, 15.8. You brought up some very good challenges. And Scott says, the reason why the Zodiac's tires at Lake Berryessa may have been different could be from a spare tire or a flat. Sure, I mean, that doesn't mean at all that the Zodiac didn't have money and didn't care about cars, and there could be an easy explanation. It's flat tire. And Scott also says, also, people short on cash do buy used tires that will result in mismatched tires. Okay, now, Scott, though, that's back to what he was asking about how that means that the Zodiac is someone who does not have a lot of money and couldn't maintain his car. I mean, I think there's insufficient evidence of that, and the first thing that was brought to my attention was that might not even be the Zodiac's car at all, that those tire tracks were actually much older than expected. So I always have to be on the side of doubt. Anam Kara says, exactly, missing 15 minutes. Well, this is back to Jack the Ripper now. True Crime Talk Radio, we go through a lot of other subjects. But, 15.8 and Anam Kara, I think, though, with Jack the Ripper, with Charles Lechmere, all of the strong points indicate that he's a good suspect for the murder of Polly Nichols. And as far as the other crimes, I get what they're saying. I get what Krister Holmgren is saying and Edward Stowe. The reasons they said, his mother lived near where Liz Stride was murdered. Everything with the murder of Polly Nichols is spot on. The other stuff, I really have to question. And I'm just not seeing this overwhelming picture. But, for a long time, I guess I have been looking at Jack Ripper, somebody who was very disorganized or not completely doing this because of some brilliant master plan, but rather just kind of not necessarily a bumbling fool, but someone who is just very angry, distraught, and has just enough awareness to commit the crimes without getting caught. But I told you, 15.8, I'll rethink some of this, and I appreciate all that stuff as well. And by the way, everybody, thank you so much for listening to this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. Thanks for talking about the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper, and for listening to the other stories. You guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, drop a comment down below, and share anything that you want in the comment section for future listeners. And I appreciate everything from all of you. You guys have a wonderful day. One more cheers from Snoopy. And welcome to the return of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. I will be back with you guys on Thursday. We'll do it all again and talk about anything you want, anything true crime related, anything under the sun or in the darkness. And that will be all for me now. Until next time,